Hi, everybody. I just want to thank checking it out. Tremendous event. Just unbelievable. I attended last year's event, and this just blows it out of the water. So thank you for the organizers. I'm going to read from notes. I have told this story many times, but it's such a great story, and there's are some details, so I thought it would be good just to read it. So I titled it Adding to the Story. 2 years ago, I made a decision to purchase a Porsche 356. A local 356er steered me to join several organizations to begin to learn about these vehicles. He directed me to join the Porsche 356 Registry and the local chapter, the Midwest 356 Club. As many of you probably do, I began perusing different places and looking at different vehicles and internet ads. I noticed an ad for this car came up on the 356 Registry's online classified section. I watched this ad for several months and kept going back to it. I finally thought to myself, well, maybe I should call on this one. I made the call and then found myself traveling to Columbus, Ohio in the middle of winter. 6 hours there, 6 hours back, no problem for my dog Ginger and I. We will just make a day of it. As you can see, the car speaks for itself. It's a beautiful example of a 1964 356C. As it turns out, the car had been owned for the last 50-plus years by an attorney who is now a retired sitting U.S. judge on the U.S. District Court. As we talked about the car, which was located in an airplane hangar on the outskirts of Columbus, he told me that this was his first Porsche. From an ad he saw in Road and Track magazine, he purchased the car in 1965 in the Columbus area from an Air Force jet pilot who brought it from France the prior year. Jim, who was a young attorney, went on to own many other Porsches, but always kept this one. He told me that when he purchased the car, the Air Force pilot made a very detailed list on how to care and maintain the car. They spent the day together, and Jim had been maintaining the car that way ever since. At that moment, I said to Jim, I need to do that. If possible, I would love to spend the day with you and learn to maintain this car the same as you have done for all these many years. So the trip was planned, and to quote a friend of mine, I began to plan what he termed an epic trip. 5 months later, with a small posse of dear friends, we traveled to the Columbus area once the weather became somewhat reasonable in early May. The weather was supposed to be beautiful, but of course that would change. 2 days before the planned trip, I called Jim to ask about the condition of the wiper blades. He said very nonchalantly, the wiper blades are pretty ineffective, that I should consider getting some Rain-X. Of course I did. As we got to Ohio, the skies indeed opened up and the rain began with continuous thunderstorms for the entire weekend. Despite the weather's attempt to dampen our spirits, it only added to the adventure. Jim and I spent the day together, changing the oil, greasing the car. At the advice of several people, I had created a more modern toolkit. While new tires were being placed on the car, I noticed the fan belt had begun to fray. All of a sudden, we had the toolkit opened, and the extra fan belt was going on with the help of Jim. After spending the day together, we had a wonderful meal, enjoying each other's company and trading many stories. Of course, the next day, the weather did not cooperate. We began to drive home, which took 8 hours in driving rain and thunderstorms. Indeed, Jim was right. The wipers were pretty ineffective. I noticed that at 60 miles an hour, the water would just pool into bigger and bigger drops. However, at 70 miles per hour, the rain would fly off the windshield. I proceeded to pass my companion vehicle and take the lead on the way home. Her 6-volt system and 1.6-liter flat 4 purred at 3,200 RPM at 70 miles an hour. Finally, somewhere in Champaign, Illinois, we saw our first rays of sunshine since the trip began. The ride home at that point was smooth sailing and indeed was the end of a truly epic trip. The history of this car is a warm and wonderful one. Jim, who was an enthusiast 30 years into ownership of this vehicle, reached back to the Air Force jet fighter, now retired, The pilot wrote a beautiful article comparing this vehicle to many other sports cars he had owned and to the many jet fighters that he had flown in the service. Ultimately, this Porsche 356 was his favorite. He likened the car to the venerable F4 Phantom II, fondly nicknamed the McDonnell Rhinoceros by those who flew her. Built like a tank, it simply didn't rattle or break or give you anything but performance Porsche built their reputation upon. Also, in 1968, Jim prepared this car for SCCA track events. The car is now running a higher performance engine, and the original engine to this day is in his friend's Speedster. The car has had one respray in its original ruby red and has its original interior. When I got the car home, I began to slowly go through the vehicle and all the extra parts and pieces that came with the car that Jim was so eager to give me. The original toolkit, the original tartan luggage that has been with the car since it was purchased in Paris and picked up directly from Stuttgart by the pilot, and many other wonderful pieces of history of the car that came with the vehicle only to add to its provenance. As I quietly read through the original owner's manual from cover to cover, I noticed all kinds of small receipts and pieces of paper tucked in the back of the manual. And then there it was, folded with yellowing corners, the original list that the jet fighter wrote out for the young attorney, methodically listing how to care for this wonderful vehicle as only a jet fighter pilot would do. In today's era of internet car purchases and receiving a car via transport service, this was truly an epic adventure and a fantastic way to continue to add to this car's warm history. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. So that concludes our story portion today.